I must tell you, I'm a bit unsettled for a couple of reasons before I begin. The first is rather mechanical. At the church I serve in Gettysburg, I normally put the microphone pack in my left side, not in my right. I tend to lean to the left in many ways, and so I feel much more comfortable if the microphone pack were in my left-hand side. But somehow I will manage. The other thing is that I feel like I need to honor the fact that I'm preaching in my spouse's church in Christmastide at a holy time, and so I want to be mindful of abiding in that sort of sense of preaching. My spouse, if you have noticed, keeps very diligent notes for his sermon. And they're written out very meticulously. I don't tend to do that very much. I tend to sort of be spontaneous, and so I can frequently sort of get off track, and I don't want to do that in his pulpit. So I've tried to compensate for that by making a list of notes. But unlike my spouse's notes, these are very, very random and very, very scattered, and if I make my way through them, we will all be fortunate. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was God, and the Word was with God. There are many who suggest that St. John's take of Jesus the Christ is unlike the gospel narratives in Matthew and Luke, which I think is true. Those are sort of event-based stories. But I'd like to flex that a bit. To me, John's account of the incarnation is a cosmological and human birth story that transcends time in many, many, many ways. We scientifically know that our universe is somewhere around 14 billion years old, give or take a billion years. We know that we are, in fact, in terms of our bodies, stardust. We have carbon. We breathe oxygen. Our bones are made of calcium. These are all elements of a universal process of evolution that has manifested itself in an incarnate way in what human beings are made of. Scientists in the last year have proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the universe hums. There are gravitational waves that move and create a sound which somehow, through the void of space, continues to take place, even into our day. And it is centuries, millennia, may I dare say millions of years old. And so John, from a first century perspective, provides a sense of God's presence in an immanent and transcendent way, being present in the form of Christ. Sophia, Logos, in Hebrew, Memra. In my romantic times, I think about the first chapter of Genesis and think about on the first day God created. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. It's interesting to note that in the Genesis 1 story of creation, the moon and stars and the sun are not created until the fourth day. On the first day, God creates light. And what's interesting to note from these sort of first century and preceding philosophies, there is a sense that God the Creator has a second essence, that God manifests God's self in a way where God speaks, God sings, God talks, God provides a bridge between that which we cannot understand, that which is beyond human comprehension and humanity, and the process of consciousness and evolution. About 100 million years ago, we can now, what's the word I want to use when we study the body? What is that called? Anatomy. We know, thank you, we know that human-like forms of existence were able to sing and to hum and to speak. We have seen the bones of these, our ancestors, and there are some hypotheses that suggest that the means by which they communicated to one another may have been humming, not unlike the humming that the universe does. Let's move more quickly into our own time. We know now that about 40,000 years ago, we have discovered flutes in the caverns and caves of France. So we know that our more recent ancestors were able to create music. In religious terms, the notions of hymns and canticles and songs of praise and songs of thanksgiving to God show up both in the East and the West. The Hindu religion is based upon the Vedas, the sacred hymns of that religious and philosophical tradition, to include the Upanishads. That's about 4,000, 3,000 years old. In our own Jewish Christian tradition, we have evidence of singing, although I think our biblical persons like to put it in the form of saying. I think I like it more as singing, because Lessons and Carols is about singing. And I think that singing is a miraculous way of God speaking to humanity and humanity speaking to God. So now I'd like you to listen to something for a minute or so.
My heart exalts in the Lord. My strength is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derise my enemies. I rejoice in God's salvation. There is none holy like the Lord. There is no rock like our God. Let not your mouth be arrogant, for the Lord is a God of all knowledge.
The Song of Hannah is a song of Hannah praising God for allowing her to bear a child. She is barren, which in the ancient world would have been problematic. Yet she was a woman of faith. And so the story goes in Samuel that she goes to the temple or to the tabernacle, and she prays silently that God will redeem her and offer her a child. And the priest who's on duty, when he sees her mouthing these words, thinks she's drunk. And so he chastises her. And she says, I'm praying for a child. I'm praying for birth to happen. And so he apologizes. And indeed, Samuel, her son, is born, who was probably one of the last judges of the tribes of Israel in that region in that time, and would go on to provide a sense. Hannah provides a sense along through the birth of Samuel, something that we receive in Mary, the mother of Jesus. And so I'd like you to listen to that now.
My soul shall call me blessed. For God, who is mighty, has done great things for me. And holy, holy, holy is his name. And God's mercies given to God's people from generation to generation. My heart o'erflows. Hallelujah.
Thank you. And so we come to the period of John. John's first 5 verses of John 1 are often thought of being sort of standing in their own, or standing in Greek philosophy, which is true. What isn't also perhaps as well known that for people who come from the Jewish tradition before the rabbinical period, the first 5 verses of John are seen as midrash, a continuing telling of story of God taking place in God's creation. It isn't until the 14th verse where John makes a statement that we hang our hats on in Christianity. For the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen him as a light to the world. Christianity takes on this sense that the divine and human came into being in Jesus the Christ in a miraculous manifest way, in a moment of universal and historic human history, to bring people closer to God and God closer to people. There are an interesting array of theological voices in the Christian and Jewish traditions which have tried to pull that together, and they're very diverse, from someone as very orthodox as Athanasius to someone like Irenaeus of Lyon, who came more from sort of the Eastern Church and wound up in France, and Clement of Alexandria, who was in the early church, in the Eastern early church, all saying essentially that the purpose of Jesus the Christ was to make God become man and man become God. That's a powerful statement. That is a powerful statement because it presumes that somehow we can become godlike and divine, which I think a lot of us don't feel particularly comfortable with, especially in times like these. And yet, if that hypothesis, if that theology is true, it provides us a window into what our time and our place in this universal theological Christian story, universally religious story, should be. I'm very fond of the writings and teachings of Teilhard de Chardin, who got himself in a little bit of trouble with the Vatican in the 20s and 30s and 40s because he presumed that evolution was true and the garden story, as told to Roman Catholics of that day and today, and us, I think, is not. And he was both a Jesuit and a scientist, a paleontologist. And he said, and I love this, in one of his writings, joy is the infallible sign of God. Joy. Joy like Hannah sings. Joy like Mary sings. Joy like the songs we sing at lessons and carols. Joy. Even if you want to sort of lean into the story of Adam and Eve as God sort of kicking them out of the garden, They are kicked out with the good knowledge of good and evil. And they are sent into the world to thrive. Now, God apparently put a cherubim at Eden so we couldn't get back into it, but here we are nonetheless. I think the ultimate message of Christmas, as it happened in that divine incarnation in Bethlehem that we praise, is part of a telos. It's part of a story that continues to go on and on and on. The Christ portion of it remains to be part of our story. We have many choices as humanity that we can make right now. Many. It is scientific fact that the sun, as it is in our sky, in our heavens, can outlive us by millions and millions of years. That is a fact. We, as a species, are divinely offered the opportunity to be awake, be alert, to offer rituals back to God, to be in good relationship with one another, as Jesus taught us to be. And I think a hope for the new year and Thanksgiving for Christmastide is to continue to understand that we remain in relationship with this earth. We remain in relationship with a transcendent God as well as an immanent God, a God who showed up in human form, in the form of a very poor baby in an oppressed time. And that we have our responsibility, let it be our faith, that we will continue to promote and live into this eternal story. Amen.